Well, hello and welcome back. Now, in this lesson, we just want to review the list of possible solutions that we now have and ask a few final questions to assess their suitability. And those questions are, what could go wrong? What are the impacts of these changes? And have I made any assumptions? Now, in a more formal decision-making process, this stage would be referred to as the risk assessment. But for our purposes, we don't need to be quite so formal. This risk assessment process may take just a few minutes, where you sit down by yourself or with your team and run through the list of possible solutions and think about some potential issues that could arise if you were to implement each of these possible solutions. And if you do work with others on a risk assessment, then once again, please practice non-judgment of people's feedback. The idea is to get full feedback, even if some of it seems implausible. It's better to have received it than not, assuming, of course, you don't spend hours and hours and hours on this risk assessment. If any significant negative issues arise at this stage, then you may wish to go back to the previous step and rethink the suitability of the specific solution in question. Now, as well as what can go wrong, we will also test for assumptions that play a part in any of your proposed solutions. And a simple way to test for assumptions is to use the question, how do we know this? If there are no facts, but just somebody's opinion supporting a particular point that you documented in the last lesson that plays a part in one of your proposed solutions, then ask yourself if you're happy to proceed with that solution on that basis. Just because something is assumed does not necessarily mean it should be rejected. You can also ensure that you have sufficient information to make a decision. Maybe there's just a single fact supporting one of the points that you documented in the last assessment. If so, and you want a little more corroborating information, you can look for additional facts to support that position or to reject that position. Okay, well, let's perform an example risk assessment using our sample problem where we need to provide customer support to our customer base during European working hours. So here we are in sheet 6.5. It's called 6.5 because I made a mistake with the numbering sequence. Now you'll notice that the risk assessment template is very simple. It's just a few questions just to trigger your inputs and get you to consider some of the negative possibilities of your proposed solutions. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to my brainstorming work, and I'm just going to copy our 3 proposed solutions. Okay, here are my proposed solutions. I could put my feedback inside this node, the proposed solution node, but that's a little busy with all the input from the creative process. So I'm going to do assessment 1. If you wish, though, if you prefer to put your risk assessment feedback inside the same node as your brainstorming feedback, by all means do so. Okay, and by the magic of editing, I've just performed the risk assessment for all 3 of the example solutions that we discussed, and I'll just walk you quickly through it. As you can see, I've chosen to put my assessment feedback in a separate node to the solution, and I've put those in a boundary just to keep everything neat to the eye. And I suggest that you consider doing that yourself. It's great practice for clear and effective mind mapping. Okay, risk assessment 1. Our proposed solution was to expand Canadian office hours. What could go wrong? Well, higher staff turnover and insufficient coverage for our customers by a graveyard shift operation. How do we know this? Well, that's our past experience. We've experienced the staff turnover. We exist in that market. We know how hard it is to hire and retain good quality people. What are the impacts of these changes? Well, those actually are the same as what could go wrong for this particular solution. Have we made any assumptions? Well, we are assuming that past staff turnover will be the same or worse in the future, but will not improve. Do we need more facts? No, not at this time. Solution 2, of course, was to set up a new office in Europe. So, assessment 2, what could go wrong? Costs could overrun. And that's just a suspicion from past experience that perhaps the project might cost more than we think. Existing staff may be reluctant to relocate, and we might not be able to hire in Europe either due to market pressures. So what are the impacts of these changes? If successful, we will remove a customer pain point. But if we fail to open a European office, then at least our service levels do not decrease. Have we made assumptions? Yes, we've assumed that some staff would want to relocate. How do we know this? Well, we know we've assumed it because it was a deliberate assumption on our part. Do we need more facts? Yes, at this point, we should ask the staff for their input and feedback, and we should speak to recruitment agencies. As it happens, we were opening an office in a market we knew well, where there were a number of other similar customer support offices, so we were pretty certain we could find the staff we needed. But again, that was an assumption, so we did end up speaking to recruitment agencies. Assessment 3. Proposal 3 was to outsource the customer support. And assessment 3, what could go wrong? A loss of intellectual property by our training people who don't work for us on our quite complicated and expensive applications. Poor control over service quality, and difficulties in training outsourced workers on complex applications. How do we know those things? Well, those are assumptions. What are the impacts of these changes? We would have a lack of control over some of our support staff because they don't work for us, they would work for an outsourced agency. And we as a company would need to develop remote training materials and skill sets to be able to train those people at a distance. Have we made any assumptions? We've assumed that our lack of control over service quality would negatively impact service. Again, perhaps the service would be amazing, but whether it was amazing or terrible, those staff didn't answer to us. So we would have very little direct control over them. Do we need more facts? Well, actually, no, we didn't, because the possible loss of intellectual property actually made this suggestion a non-starter. So there are our 3 risk assessments. So that's how I did these risk assessments. If you want to. And as you can see, this risk assessment, to give it its formal name, need not be a lengthy, difficult process. Now, please open up the template mind map and go to the sheet marked 7, Risk Assessment Template, and perform your own risk assessment on each of the possible solutions to your own problem that you documented in sheet 6. And once you've done that work, please join me in the next lesson. And as always, thank you very much for your time.